Thank you for inviting me and congratulations on the book. Beautiful job. Seems like a really interesting book. And I think very timely as well in terms of sort of the pressing need for a more sort of sustainable mobility in the future. My paper is, and Dag's paper, my colleague, we've worked quite a bit over the years on especially technology, masculinity, and I'm more of a scholar in masculinity studies, and Dag is both, I would say, transport and mobility, although I've written a number of books over the years like Men and the Machines and Men's Love and Passion, and how masculinity and technology sort of co-constructed. This paper is more conceptual, a bit theoretical, you might say, and I hope you bear with me on that. And maybe sort of speaking to some of the issues that you've been brought up, like Christina, yeah, brought up, and and I'll try to. This is a sort of old school. This is an old school PowerPoint presentation. I actually lost a much more fancy version of this yesterday, so please bear with me with that as well. But we argue in this paper for a sort of a closer attention to the place of emotions and affect, and I won't go into the difference between emotions and affect, which is quite a sort of very theoretical argument. But basically we argue that emotions and affect are strong motivational powers that regulate how we travel, in what way we travel, and how we appreciate different means of transportations beyond purely rational choices. And of course this connects also to what Christina talked about, intersectionality. Opportunities of transport and mobility are closely related to a number of intersectional categories, as you all know, such as gender, age, class, and these sort of communities and are in themselves generate in different forms of what we talk about in this paper as effective economies, drawing on the work of Sarah Ahmed. I won't go into that discussion, but sort of effective economies, emotional economies. And it is within such effective or emotional economies that we as consumers, drivers, passengers, and travel companions do things together and align ourselves with the different communities of mobility. There might be motorcyclists, car owners, pedestrians, skateboarders, cyclists, etc., etc. And we do that through emotional attachment. So, and what we're arguing for here, that we see emotions, so rather than seeing emotions as psychological dispositions, which of course would be a traditional psychological view, we need to consider how emotions work to mediate between the individual and the affective, between the material and the non-material, the psychic and the social, because this is actually what emotional work does, sort of mediates between different layers of identity. And we emphasize that it's important to taking emotions into account, as they are often major reasons for either resisting or adapting new technologies within the transport and mobility sector. So such an approach is, we argue of course, increasingly important, as there are a number of pressing concerns that need to be addressed in car-intensive societies in urgent need of a future sustainable mobility. So, and not least is it important to question or start questioning the deep-rooted historical as well as contemporary connection between car cultures, community automobility and masculinity. So, and this is something we, and I'll, hopefully I'll come to, I've got a film with automated vehicles, Volvo's automated Vera, which is a robot, automated robot, and which we've written about in another paper actually on masculinity and automated vehicles, and basically asking the question, what happens when there's no one in the driver's seat? Where do the men go and where do the women go? And everyone in between as well. So we see that this is an emotional economy founded on control, speed, sexuality, embodiment, as you were asking before, and sort of the intense emotions and excitement aroused through the combinations of these different elements. And since we also are moving into an era of smart mobilities, or presumably smart mobilities, we also stress that it's very important to address more than the functionality of the transport, and I think this is seems to be a consensus of that in this room. And the latter, the functionality of the transport, is something which we see often preserves outdated technological infrastructures and trajectories. So basically we are asking
the arrow to the right.
Oh, the arrow to the right, okay. So basically we're asking this question. What role do emotions and affect play in the gendered imaginary of current and future systems of transport and smart mobility? And in the paper we do both, we take up historical examples as well as contemporary ones, and hopefully I get to my contemporary ones. Which is, and where we outline how, what we call the entanglement between technology and masculinity, or the embodied entanglement of technology and masculinity, which has been so enormously important for forming imaginaries within the transport and mobility sector. That close connection, men's love and passion for technology, and how that's been played out in the automotive industry. I could give you a number of lectures just on that, but I won't do that now. But it's definitely a core, I think, for thinking around how, as a core value. So we would, but a bit pretentious in this paper, I would say, we are moving towards what we call an anthropology of transport effect, which by we mean how people feel and act as a consequence of aroused emotions experienced in the mobility and transport system. Mimi Scheller, the sociologist, that talked about automotive emotions. And basically, what do we do and how do we emotionally experience things in the transport and mobility system? And does it matter? Apparently it does. And how does it matter? That would be anthropology of transport effect. So our goal is not only then, of course, to argue for an anthropology of transport effect, but also contribute, I hope, with discussions of the place of emotions, gender, and power in smart mobilities. In historical as well as current automobility systems, horsepower and risk stand out as important elements in the constructions of many forms of identities and emotional attachment to motor vehicles. Historically, the appeal of cars and motor vehicles, as all of you in this room knows, of course, has been related to masculinity through associations of power, speed, but also through the connotations with the wild, with the untamable. That is what we call anthropomorphization, usually. So despite its obvious nowadays damaging effects on the environment, I think one reason why the combustion engine remains the dominant technology worldwide is definitely this core value and entanglement of technology and masculinity. And of central concern to understand the place of emotions, pleasure, power in mobilities, including our sort of current shift towards smart mobility, are these different entanglements of technology and masculinity. And of course this is sort of also, as I understand, as a core of this book, and which I think is also really timely in that respect. So smart mobilities are also political technologies, and they need to be understood in relation to emotions, affect, cyborgization, which is another concept, how we increasingly become cyborgs, and sort of our gendered intimacy with technological artifacts and systems. And as we have, this is the examples we use in the article, and how technology and masculinity has been co-constructed in transport and mobility. And for those interested, Dag has written a wonderful paper in which I think is sort of state of the art when it comes to technology, masculinity, and transport mobility, in the book or an edited volume that we just published, is the Routledge International Handbook of Masculinity Studies, and Dag has written a wonderful chapter sort of covering the literature with regard to masculinity and transport and mobility. Just came out. But as we have argued elsewhere, it's also this relation between technology and masculinity is also changing in the sense that, and as we're quoting ourselves here, the gender implications mean that cars, trucks, and other motor vehicles as traditional means for men to express masculine identities, status, pleasures, not least performed through ownership, care, aggressive or competitive driving, are gradually being undermined. Smart mobility is often formulated in utopian narratives as the next technological solution to the present transport problems, bringing hopes for a more sustainable transport futures with increased safety, improved fuel economy, reduced congestion, and increased road capacity. For more than a century, automobiles have been objects of what we're talking about, objects of desire and fascination, especially for men, but of course also for many women. And transport may entail very different emotions such as pleasure, feeling, power, fascination, but also anger such as road rage. But historically, at least, being emotional about and affected by cars and driving is, as many have pointed out, typically masculine coded. So even though men and women show no differences in their ability to anthropomorphize machines and motorcycles, as, for example, the American historian Enda Duffy has written about. And the sort of the act of anthropomorphization has, throughout history, typically been a masculine enterprise. And by anthropomorphization here we refer to the process through which humans project human qualities onto non-humans, such as artifacts or animals for that part. And sort of that conjoining between human and machines is actually exactly what technology and masculinity is about. So, an anthropology of transport effect built on these insights. How am I doing with time?
3 minutes.
Oof, yeah. So then I'll try to, maybe we should, show the film. So we can. That's the last slide anyway, so you maybe can stay on. Anyway, I'll try to wrap up here, but what we argue here and generally with regard to automated vehicles and automation is that Vera is just one case of a number of possibilities of how emotions, pleasure and power come to matter in smart mobilities. And which also can possibly change, sort of a utopian emancipatory vision could also change that old core value of the entanglements of technology and masculinity. So to conclude, and I've got a long argument around Vera here, but I'll just skip that. So conclude, smart mobilities, we argue, have the potential to open up exciting possibilities beyond the current mobility paradigm, based on rationality and instrumentalism, in combination with the gendered economy of pleasure and masculine pleasure, historically masculine pleasure. And self-driving vehicles, as you know, already a reality on the roads of North America and parts of Europe, tested largely by researchers, engineers, but also by ordinary people, as in Volvo's Drive Me project in Gothenburg. And we argue here that the affectionate attachment in such grandiose engineering projects makes up a fundamental part in achieving change. And we also believe that such a perspective seems not only necessary, but also smart, as we are facing an irreversible need for sustainable mobility. So the inherent emancipatory openings of smart mobilities are giving designers, engineers, consumers, planners and stakeholders immense opportunities of thinking beyond our fossil fuel congested transport system, which is still based on what we called a masculinity of industrial modernity. So yeah, I'll stop it.